In talk radio of, for, and by you, the people. Live nationwide and streaming live at lesliemarshallshow.com. Call in with your thoughts at 888-6-LESLIE.
Hey there! I hope you're looking at me and listening to me. I'm Leslie Marshall. Welcome or welcome back. Only true democracy in talk. Thank you for listening or for watching wherever you listen, on radio, on podcast, on stream, wherever you watch, on YouTube Live, LinkedIn Live, Facebook Live, or Twitter's Periscope. Happy Friday, TGIF. I hope everybody's had a wonderful week and looking forward to the weekend. I'm pretty much with two teenagers just a non-paid Uber driver as a mother at this point. So people are like, have a great weekend. I'm like, what weekend, I'm really glad to have you with us, whether you're listening or watching. Lots to talk about. So let's get to it and kick it off and check what's rich from those headlines. It's Earth Day, and since the first Earth Day back on April 22nd, 1970, the U.S. national average temperature has climbed by 2.6% Fahrenheit. The states have warmed, many of them significantly. Why does this matter? Well, Earth Day is supposed to be a symbol of the environmental movement, originally born out of air pollution and water pollution. But now it is a reminder of human-caused climate change, and that's leading to more frequent, more severe heat waves, wildfires, stronger hurricanes, and heavier precipitation events. When you look at the numbers, out of 49 states with sufficient data and 246 cities examined by researchers at Climate Central, a climate communications nonprofit group, each state and 244 of the cities saw temperatures climb over the past 52 years. The numbers themselves tell a story here. 30%, that's the increase in the atmospheric concentration of heat-trapping carbon dioxide in the atmosphere, and that's since 1970. 7.7% Fahrenheit, that's the amount that Reno, Nevada has warmed since 1970. So it puts it first on the list of fastest warming cities in our nation. Other cities in the Southwest saw large increases as well, and that reflects the drying trend in the region, as well as expanding urban populations and shifting atmospheric circulation consistent with global warming. I can say here in the state of California, we're seeing the damage of that dryness. Not only does it result, in drought, and that results in dead animals and dead plant life, and certainly hurts agriculture, but it is just like a match where there's a lot of brush for wildfires. And we've seen an increase of wildfires and the damage that those fires do to humans, to animals, to plants, and to the topography of the land, not just here in California, but in places that are affected by this shifting atmospheric global warming and drought and dryness. 4.3% Fahrenheit. That's the total average warming in Alaska during the past 52 years. And it earns it the title of the fastest warming state. Yep, Alaska. Climate, and we've seen what that's done to polar bears, right? My kids love animals. I love animals. My husband loves animals. We also love adventure when we go on vacations. And there's a vacation we've always wanted to do up in Churchill, Canada, to go see polar bears and to see beluga whales, and even you can get in the water, not in the water with them, but in a wetsuit. It's called aqua gliding, and you get on sort of like a raft. You put your face in, and sometimes a beluga whale comes right up to you. And, we like doing, fun, crazy things like that in the wild, as opposed to seeing, animals, mammals in a zoo. And it used to be you could only do this in the winter, and now you can do it in April. You can even do it in June or July. When I say do it, you can see polar bears in June or July. Why? Because there's so much melting and so much lack of glaciers and icebergs for these polar bears that they kind of just hang around town, so they're easy to spot by locals in this area near the Arctic Circle. And even though it's more beneficial for those of us like myself that want to see a polar bear alive in the wild, It's not good for the polar bears and the polar bear population. So anyway, climate projections have consistently showed that higher latitudes would warm faster than the rest of the world, to my point. In addition to the Southwest, the Mid-Atlantic, the Northeast, also seeing rapidly rising temperatures. Vermont, they've experienced a 3-degree increase, not percent, sorry. So what's next? Recent reports from the UN's top climate panel starkly show how climate change is affecting the planet in transformative ways, and that the world is not on course to meet the temperature targets laid out in the Paris Agreement. However, scientists have shown that limiting warming, well, it will be less costly than suffering from the consequences of that warming. And a portfolio of solutions, they already exist to tackle the problem. Let's listen to President Biden's Earth Day remarks from earlier today.
On this day 52 years ago, millions of Americans of every age and background rallied together for the first Earth Day, a vision of a healthier, more prosperous America and, quite frankly, world. And over time, they delivered cleaner air, cleaner water, proof that a sustainable environment can mean a stronger economy. They're not in conflict with one another. And today, a new generation of Americans is leading the way against the threat of a climate crisis. My administration stands with them as we listen to the science and turn crisis into opportunity, modernizing our infrastructure to make it more resilient to extreme weather, spurring investment in clean energy that cuts costs for families and businesses, bolsters our energy independence, and creates millions of good-paying union jobs. Last year, the United States deployed more solar, wind, battery storage, and electric vehicles than any other year in our history. We set ambitious standards to cut pollution from cars, trucks, and industry as well. We're advancing locally led conservation efforts and protecting our public lands. We're reasserting America's leadership in the world once again, including recruiting over 100 countries to reduce methane emissions and announcing the first ever carbon-based trade deal. And we're lifting up communities and workers too often left behind and left out. We know there's much more to do. On this Earth Day, we have to recommit ourselves to the work that lies ahead to achieve a more secure and prosperous, more sustainable future. One where we strengthen our economy, pass on a healthy planet down to our children and grandchildren, make life better for everybody. So happy Earth Day. Let's keep the faith here.
And that is President Joe Biden on this Earth Day. Speaking of audio, before I play this audio, former President Donald Trump and House Minority Leader, the former House Speaker from the Republican side of the aisle, Kevin McCarthy, they spoke on the phone last night because there's a newly released audio of McCarthy telling Republican leaders that Donald Trump should resign. This was in the wake of the January 6, 2021 attack on the Capitol. The audio has contradicted McCarthy's claim that he did not push for Trump to resign after that deadly insurrection by a pro-Trump mob. But today, more audio clips have surfaced. You're going to hear what the former speaker, the minority leader, said. Here is audio obtained by the New York Times of the House Minority Leader just days after the January 6th insurrection. This is McCarthy talking with Republican Congresswoman Liz Cheney about suggesting that President Donald Trump resign, about the 25th Amendment, and a possible pardon from Vice President Pence. Take a listen.
Liz, you on the phone?
Yeah, I'm here. Thanks, Kevin. I guess there's a question. When we were talking about the 25th Amendment resolution, and you asked if what happens if it gets there after he's gone. Is there any chance? Are you hearing that he might resign? Is there any reason to think that might happen?
I've had some few discussions. My gut tells me no. I'm seriously thinking of having that conversation with him tonight. I haven't talked to him in a couple days. From what I know of him, I mean, you guys all know him too. Do you think he'd ever back away? But what I think I'm going to do is I'm going to call him. This is what I think. No, it'll pass the House. I think there's a chance it'll pass the Senate even when he's gone. And I think there's a lot of different ramifications for that. Now, I haven't had a discussion with the Dems that if he did resign, would it not happen? Now, this is one personal fear I have. I do not want to get into any conversations about Pence pardoning anything like that. I mean, the only discussion I would have with him is that I think this will pass, and it would be my recommendation we should resign. I mean, that would be my take, but I don't think he would take it, but I don't know.
And here's McCarthy saying Trump admitted he bore some responsibility for January. I thought we had 40 seconds. It's a 23-second cut. No? Okay, we're going to take a break. When we come back, we'll hear two more cuts of audio from the former speaker, the minority leader, Kevin McCarthy, Republican here from the state of California, and contradictions to what he said, or asked for, or didn't, and what we actually are hearing on audio in his conversation with Republican Congresswoman Liz Cheney. I'm Leslie Marshall, back with that, more from the headlines, and our guests coming up in the second half of the hour, and you, of course, right after this.
I want to get back to seeing my grandbabies every Sunday and smothering them with big hugs and kisses.
I want to get back to football games with my boys.
I want to get back to feeling and touching, connecting with the people around me.
I want to get back to family dinners and my grandma's mac and cheese.
I want to get back to real grocery shopping, taking my time, walking down every aisle, smelling the tomatoes and melons, having a free sample or two, or three.
COVID-19 has changed how we live and how we feel. But now, there are vaccines. And they are the first step that let us get back to feeling optimistic about the days ahead of us. It's okay to have questions.
Is it safe?
Should I get it?
Should I wait?
Now, get the facts. Learn more at getvaccineanswers.org so you can make an informed decision when vaccines are available to you. Brought to you by the Ad Council.
Hey, sis, missed you this morning. Kim told me you weren't feeling well, so I'm just doing a self-care check.
Oh, thank you, friend.
How you doing?
Girl, listen, my energy was so low because I didn't eat breakfast when I got up, so I had to miss virtual yoga with y'all.
Trust me, I understand.
But I'm doing much better now that I've eaten, so I'm back on track.
Great. In that case, let's get some steps in tonight. I'll come over and we can walk around the lake.
Sounds good. Appreciate you being in my business, too. Now, let me get in yours. Did you check your blood pressure today?
I did that and my squats, okay?
Okay.
High blood pressure is not going to be my friend if I can help it. See you at 6?
Let's get it. See you then.
Now more than ever, it's important that we protect our hearts and the hearts of those we love. Check in on one another and be a part of a healthy blood pressure movement. Rally your squad to take the online pledge at releasethepressure.org. Brought to you by the Release the Pressure Coalition and the Ad Council.
I'm Rick Smith, and this is Labor History in 2. On this day in labor history, the year was 1938. That was the day the Keene Mountain coal mine exploded near Grundy, Virginia. Described as a flame-belching volcano, the explosion killed 45 and injured 3 more. It is considered one of the worst mining disasters in the history of Virginia. One surviving miner described the scene saying, quote, "I saw coal-carrying cars, motors, slate, and timbers spouted as if from a cannon. The state mine inspector determined the miners had been killed instantly. The mine had just opened the year before and produced 40 railroad cars of coal a day. But the mine was also owned by the Red Jacket Coal Company. In Mingo County, West Virginia, years earlier, Red Jacket had been a key player in keeping the UMWA out, making its employees sign yellow dog contracts and winning injunctions against union organizing. As a member of the Williamson Coal Operators Association, Red Jacket contributed to the hostile anti-union environment that created the conditions for the Matewan Massacre and the Battle of Blair Mountain in the early 20s. They called in Baldwin Phelps detectives to start evicting Matewan strikers from company housing. In the aftermath of the 1938 explosion, new mine safety regulations were demanded. The inspectors were finally given the legal right to conduct inspections over the protest of mine owners in 1941. However, there was no power to enforce the new regulations. The Phipps family commemorated the disaster in its 1965 song, Red Jacket Mine Explosion.
Under the ground. What could have brought such disturbance? Oh, what could have caused such a fright?
Labor History in 2 brought to you by the Illinois Labor History Society and The Rick Smith Show.
What a scene on that sad Friday night.
We are back. Happy Friday. I'm Leslie Marshall. Guest coming up in the second half of the hour, but this is the second half of Ripped from the headlines. I was talking about the contradictions and, from the minority leader, former House Speaker Kevin McCarthy, Republican from California, as audio has now been revealed. The New York Times had obtained and shared with all of the public via the press. And we heard him talking with Republican Congresswoman Liz Cheney. We heard him suggesting that President Trump resign, talked about invoking the 25th Amendment, and even talked about a possible pardon from Vice President Mike Pence. We played that before the break. Here are a couple more pieces of audio. The first up is Kevin McCarthy saying that Donald Trump admitted he bore some responsibility for January 6th. This was during the January 11th phone call, 5 days after the insurrection. Take a listen.
But let me be very clear to all of you, and I've been very clear to the president. He bears responsibilities for his words and actions. No ifs, ands, or buts. I asked him personally today, does he hold responsibility for what happened? Does he feel bad about what happened? He told me he does have some responsibility for what happened. And he needs to acknowledge that.
Never has he? McCarthy now telling House Republican leaders what Trump did on January 6th is unacceptable and nobody should defend it. Interestingly enough, Mitch McConnell kind of had all this going on, but there's not tape of it, at least not yet. Here is the actual tape of McCarthy telling the House Republican leaders what I just said.
All right, I know this is not fun. I know this is not great. I know this is very tough, but what I want to do, especially through here, is I don't want to rush things. I want everybody to have all the information needed. I've had it with this guy. What he did is unacceptable. Nobody can defend that, and nobody should defend it.
You know what kills me? The people that love Donald Trump might hate Kevin McCarthy for this, but the Republicans won't divide into like a McCarthy Trump camp. They'll just all band together. And I got to say, that's admirable. I wish my damn party, Democrats, would do the same thing. Seriously. If Bernie Sanders had embraced Hillary Clinton, we wouldn't be having this conversation still about what's going on in our country and what continues to go on with this just disgusting division along lines of insanity. I mean, seriously, when you question, oh, the election was stolen. Somebody tweeted today, and I retweeted it. If Democrats were going to steal the election, we would have done it in 2016, not 2020. Anyway, let's rip another. The United Nations is seeing growing evidence of war crimes in Ukraine as a horror story. That's what human violations that we're seeing unfolding. And UN Human Rights Chief Michelle Bachelet said today that it is a horror story. Driving the news of the Russian forces during the nearly 2 months now of war, who have indiscriminately shelled and bombed populated areas. They've killed civilians. They've wrecked hospitals, schools, and other civilian infrastructure and actions that may amount to war crimes. So when Joe Biden called Putin a war criminal, he wasn't that far off. The UN specifically cited reported atrocities in the Kyiv suburb of Busha, where it documented the unlawful killing, including summary execution of some 50 civilians. They say that Russia's use of cluster submunitions on a railway station in the eastern Ukrainian city of Kramatorsk, I'm sorry, I'm butchering some of these Ukrainian names, where at least 60 civilians were killed, is, quote, emblematic of the failure to adhere to the principle of distinction, the prohibition of indiscriminate attacks, and the principle of precaution enshrined in international humanitarian law. At least 3,000 civilians have died because they could not access medical care and because of the stress on their health during the war. And they also go on to say, the UN, quote, this includes being forced by Russian armed forces to stay in basements or not being allowed to leave their homes for days or weeks. Think about that the next time that I can actually swear, can't I, Mark? The next time you bitch, gripe, and moan about wearing a mask or having to stay in your house while Uber Eats, Grubhub, and Netflix are available to you and Amazon delivers. Anyway, the big picture, Russia has repeatedly denied its target civilians and rejected reports of the atrocities seen in cities like Busha. The International Criminal Court and others have launched investigations into possible war crimes and other human rights violations committed in Ukraine. The war crimes have been historically hard to investigate. Often they're more challenging to prosecute. Over these 8 weeks, international humanitarian law has not been merely ignored, but seemingly tossed aside. And they say, quote, our work to date has detailed a horror story of violations perpetrated against civilians. We know the actual numbers of casualties are going to be much higher as the horrors inflicted in areas of intense fighting, such as Mariupol, come to light. And she further added, the scale of summary executions of civilians in areas previously occupied by Russian forces are also emerging. The preservation of evidence and decent treatment of mortal remains must be ensured, as well as psychological and other relief of victims and their relatives. The bottom line, first and foremost, this senseless war must stop, she said, but as the fighting shows no signs of abating, it is vital that all parties to the conflict give clear instructions to their combatants. Click something too quick. But as the fighting, let me say that again, as the fighting shows no sign of abating, it is vital that all parties to the conflict give clear instructions to their combatants to strictly respect international humanitarian law and international humanitarian rights. Just absolutely terrible. More on Ukraine, another story from Ukraine, and that is a poll. Most Americans, oh, wait a minute. What? I thought I had more on Ukraine, and I clicked, and it was a mask mandate poll. Let me see what I did wrong here. Let me see. Another Ukraine story. Nope. When I clicked that. Oh, okay. Sounds good. Sorry, when I clicked on the link, it said more on Ukraine story, but there is, let's divert and rip another. Now I want to talk about a poll for mask mandates we're going to throw in here because this has just come out. Americans' opinions on airport mask requirements, that's a percentage who support mask requirements in airports. I would be one of them. A total of 75%. Yep, 3/4 of Americans, 91% of Democrats, 57% of Republicans. So that's a majority in both. And a percentage who say they're very likely to wear a mask in airports, a total 46. 58% Democrats, 34% Republicans. Count me. I was supposed to fly to New York next week, but I am starting to fly back to D.C. If you recall, before the pandemic, I did a lot of my Fox hits on set in New York and D.C. I'm going to be doing more flying again. So mask mandates in airports weren't actually bothering Americans too much. That's according to the latest Ipsos polling. The big picture here is while the end of masking requirements for airlines and many airports was reportedly greeted with applause, well, the poll shows that most Americans, even most Republicans, were fine with the requirements and are largely unmoved by their demise. In a surprising departure from the strict partisan divides we usually see on COVID, on this pandemic, Democrats, Republicans, and independents, well, they're all basically on the same page with this. Democrats and independents support mask mandates by much wider margins than Republicans, but most Republicans still on board. Like I said, 57% of Republicans of that 75%. And when it comes to actual behavior, well, the bipartisanship wanes a bit. 34% of Americans say they're likely to keep wearing the masks, even though 58% of Democrats do, 46% of independents. Majorities in all three categories said they have not been on a plane since the pandemic began. So it's one thing to say what you would do, woulda, coulda, shoulda. And asked whether the removal of mask mandates would change their willingness to fly, well, majority said they would not make a difference. I'm Leslie Marshall. That's what's ripped from the headlines. Great guests coming up. We are going to take a break. We'll be back with him, and we'll be back with you right after this. Don't go away.
Hey, Dad, how do airplanes fly? What's in this box? Can I touch this? Where does sand come from? Is this tree good for climbing? What happens if I mix these two things together? How are babies made? What does this thing do?
Kids are curious about everything, including guns. Talking to them about gun safety in your home is a good first step, but you can do more. Always keep your guns locked, unloaded, and stored separately from ammunition. Storing your guns securely is the best way to prevent family fire, including unintentional shootings. For more information on safe gun storage and ways to keep your family safe, visit endfamilyfire.org. That's endfamilyfire.org.
What do we keep in the attic? What's this thing called? Can I ride my bike backwards?
Like I said, kids are curious. It's up to us to keep them safe. Brought to you by End Family Fire, Brady, and the Ad Council.
Right now, our country feels divided, but there's a place where people are coming together.
I gotta tell you, I was nervous to talk to someone so different than me.
Me too, but I'm glad we are.
Love Has No Labels and One Small Step are helping people with different political views, beliefs, and life experiences come together through conversation, and it feels good.
Wow, your story is so...
Interesting?
Yeah.
When people actually sit down, talk, and listen to one another, they can break down boundaries and connect as human beings. At lovehasnolabels.com/onesmallstep, you can listen to amazing, life-changing conversations and find simple tools to start a conversation of your own.
I know one thing. This conversation gives me hope.
It gives me a lot of hope, too.
Take a step toward bringing our country and your community together by having the courage to start a conversation at lovehasnolabels.com.
What is so supreme about the Supreme Court? I mean, besides being housed in an imposing marble building, being the final stop on America's judicial train, and having its 9 members look photogenically authoritarian in those full-body black robes. And yes, its existence is written into the Constitution, but so is Congress, and no one thinks of it as anything supreme. We 330 million Americans are told we must obey the law as defined by a half-dozen unelected lawyers on this court. Why should we democratic citizens do that? After all, these legalistic elites have no actual power to force their personal beliefs on us. There's no Supreme Court army. In fact, their sole source of power is one that is intangible, extremely fragile, and easily frittered away: public trust. We should go along with their rulings only if they appear to be fair and honest, not based on personal whim or partisan ideology, and not meant to extend plutocratic power over the people. As Justice Elena Kagan rightly put it, the only way we can get people to do what we think they should do is because people respect us. That's where the present majority of far-right-wing appointees have failed so abjectly. Rather than meeting a lofty standard of judiciousness, all 6 have pulled the court down into the mire of crass Republican politics. They've corrupted the system and jiggered the law to decree that corporate campaign cash is free speech, that the state can take over women's bodies, that the Republican Party can unilaterally shut millions of voters out of America's voting booths, and so awful much more that enthrones the few over the many. This is Jim Hightower saying, respect? Trust? The Republican court is already down to 40% public approval rating, having surrendered its legitimacy to be a governing authority over us.
And we're back. I'm Leslie Marshall. Welcome back. We welcome to the program Mike Italiano. Mike is CEO of Capital Market Partnership, CMP. They're a nonprofit public charity coalition of leading investors, investment bankers, governments, NGOs, and professional firms. CMP is working to accelerate sustainable investment and by facilitating secondary markets and fixed income and equity investments, thus stimulating the economy and stopping irreversible and unmanageable systematic climate risk. Their website, capitalmarketspartnership.com. Check it out. Mike, welcome to the program. Thank you for joining us, and good to have you on this Friday.
Happy Earth Day, Leslie. My pleasure.
And it's good to have you on this Earth Day. Obviously, one of the reasons we asked you, because it is a Earth Day. There is an IPCC 2030 deadline for preserving a livable planet, right? Is that a realistic, achievable goal by that time that the Intergovernmental Panel on Climate Change put forth, that deadline of 2030?
I don't think we can argue too much with nature. I think it is what it is. It's realistic if we use the money in the capital markets, which there is plenty. There's investors with over $70 trillion in assets ready to be deployed to reduce what IPCC said a few years ago was $14 trillion of carbon pollution. to preserve a habitable planet, and that's probably up now about $30 trillion. But those assets can be rapidly deployed through higher rated green building bonds, which green buildings have the largest global market penetration of any sustainable activity. There's hundreds of thousands of them all over the world. So owners can issue those bonds, make their buildings zero emission. In San Jose, you see downtown San Jose, $2 billion of zero emission buildings. Also, green initial public offerings. Both those have been documented to achieve the deadline, can rapidly deploy the $30 trillion in assets.
You know, this was the final part of the IPCC's sixth assessment on the state of global warming. And I think the message is clear, and it has been, 6 times in a row, that the window for keeping that heating below 1.5 degrees Celsius to limit catastrophic climate impacts, worsening wildfires, which we see here in the state I'm in of California, flooding, which we see especially in the Midwest and the South. That window has become very small. It certainly becomes smaller. These are facts. This is science. Why aren't politicians, I don't care if they're Democrat or Republican, and not just in the United States, but throughout the world, taking this much more seriously? Everybody knows, and I don't care what they're saying in public, behind closed doors, most of these individuals, or if we're looking at congressional members in the states, in the 50 states in the United States, they're seeing ramifications of this flooding, or more precipitation with hurricanes, or higher winds, drier temperatures. We have droughts here more so in California over the past decade than historically, and certainly we're having more wildfires historically. That's just California.
Right.
We're seeing that throughout a lot of the rest of the states, in our nation. Why aren't they taking this more seriously? Because many of us are going to see this and not. This isn't just kicking it down the road because this is going to be like our grandchildren, great-grandchildren. We're not going to be here. These are things that are happening now and that we are going to witness these events.
Yeah. Leslie, if you look at the history of environmental progress, there hasn't been federal legislation environmentally since the 80s. And it's very hard for the federal government to take a lead. That's why with green buildings, which is $1 trillion a year global certification program, we started green buildings as a voluntary standard. And consensus standard went through a Democratic approval. Seattle adopted it, Santa Monica, Austin, Texas, New York State issued tax credits, and the federal government said, this isn't going away, we're going to do it. So right now, what you saw is there's 18 federal agencies, 34 states, over 200 cities, 200 universities, 64 countries, and the largest building portfolio owners in the world have all adopted the LEED Green Building Standard. So that's kind of a bottom-up approach. It works very well right now. We believe that the federal government will follow like they did with the Green Building Program. Right now, we're working with a federal agency in a leading California city to launch green initial public offerings and higher rated green building bonds. So we know that green buildings have higher cash flows. They have 30% fewer defaults. So that's why we have higher credit ratings. That's the global measure of added financial value. So we believe the federal government will rapidly follow. We just need a little more leadership right now, which we believe we're poised to have, and these products can move very fast because investors are screaming for it. The investors are ready to buy them.
When you look at just the whole picture, right? We have our energy, systems, and then of course we have right now people getting so angry at gas prices, at the pump, and there are some easy fixes, which is, say, forget it. I'm fed up with, putting gas in a car. I can plug my car in, and that's where we're headed. We're seeing the big car manufacturers in the United States and throughout the world headed that way. There will be a day where, you'll be able to buy a car that fills with gas on eBay for $5 because it'll sit in your front yard as, a decoration, right? fossil fuels are responsible for 2/3 of planet-warming carbon emissions, and that's since 1850.
Right.
When we look at the concurrent electrification of a global energy system powered largely by wind and by sun, the cost of those renewables, which was a big issue and which politicians on the right would constantly bring up, that cost, truly factually has declined up to 85% since 2010. So all of these alternatives, we're even seeing, for crying out loud, when you have a Tesla that you can buy for under 50 grand that you can plug in, right? And I know some people may say, well, Leslie, under 50 grand, but a lot of people out there that are leasing cars that are, around that or higher. So, is the argument about cost becoming less and less because these things are more affordable, not just for corporations, but individual consumers?
No, actually, these sustainable technologies are more profitable. They're less risky. They're preferred by investors. So the cost isn't an issue. The issue really is they're disruptive technologies. And when you look at the history of disruptive technologies going back to the telegraph and, superseding the Pony Express, they've all really viewed that new technology as a competitor. And so they try to kill it. And so what you're seeing is wind and solar, even green buildings, not so much now, are disruptive technologies threatening the status quo. So it is controversial, but people make billions and billions of dollars on disruptive technologies. Look at Tesla. It's a highly disruptive technology, but it's got a 7-year competitive advantage, forcing all the other major vehicle manufacturers to go electric. The federal government doesn't even need to regulate it anymore. This is how the market works. So I think for Earth Day, where people feel like they don't have an opportunity to do something themselves, we're a nonprofit. We encourage people to get involved. There's things that people can do, to help move the markets. And then the government will follow. So I think we're poised right now to let this happen. Green buildings, for example. We launched it in 2000. In 15 years, it was $1 trillion a year business. That's fast.
Very.
So it can happen.
The IPCC offers mitigation pathways to achieve immediate and deep emissions reductions across all sectors. And that would mean around a 50% cut in greenhouse gas emissions. That's relative to the levels of 2019 by the end of this decade. I think, we talked at the onset of the interview about achieving that, if it's achievable. You're CEO of Capital Markets Partnership, the CMP, and you have some solutions that you've proposed that, go hand in hand with the IPCC's offers. So first up, IPCC, we talked about 2030. And you know what? We have like a minute to break. When we come back, let's talk about those solutions with you as CEO of Capital Markets Partnership, okay? And we will take a break, and when we come back, we'll talk about those solutions because people always like to hear something positive and possible and give them hope, especially on a Friday going into the weekend. Mike Italiano is CEO of Capital Markets Partnership, the CMP. Check out their website, capitalmarketspartnership.com. We're going to take a break. We'll come back with Mike. We'll come back with you right after this, and we're going to talk about the solutions proposed by Capital Markets Partnership, the CMP, to achieve the IPCC's 2030 deadline, preserving a livable planet. Don't we all want that? I want that for my kids, even though they're teenagers right now, and I'd like to kill them some days. I still want them to breathe. We'll be back right after this.
If you missed Leslie on TV this week, catch up at lesliemarshallshow.com.
What I know about courage, I learned from my adoptive mom. She said sometimes you just gotta hold on and know we'll get through this. Mom, we are so high up. Hold my hand.
No, you hold my hand.
Here we go.
Learn about adopting a teen from foster care. You can't imagine the reward. Visit adoptuskids.org to find out more.
I learned patience from my adoptive dad. All he had to say was,
"Hey, you got this. Just breathe." Hey, we're pretty good.
Yeah.
Might have to start a band.
I
about it.
Learn about adopting a teen from foster care. You can't imagine the reward. Visit adoptuskids.org to find out more. This message is brought to you by Adopt US Kids, the U.S. Department of Health and Human Services, and the Ad Council.
COVID-19 has changed how we live and how we feel. We show up differently, worship differently, and have found new ways to express our love and support to family and friends. But now there are vaccines, and they are the first step that lets us get back into the things we miss most, like spreading the word without spreading concern, girls tripping instead of solo sipping, brunching instead of late night munching, and talking smack with a side of mac and cheese. It's okay to have questions about COVID-19 vaccines.
Should I get it?
Should I wait?
Is it safe?
Can I trust it?
What about pre-existing conditions?
Now get the facts. Visit getvaccineanswers.org so you can make an informed decision when COVID-19 vaccines are available to you. Brought to you by the Ad Council.
(911), what's your emergency?
America's healthcare system is broken and people are dying.
Welcome to Code WACK, where we shine a light on our callous healthcare system, how it hurts us, and what we can do about it. I'm your host, Brenda Gazar. This time on Code WACK, what is the health insurance industry's game plan for the future? What role is Medicare playing in that plan, and what does that mean for us? To find out, we recently spoke to health insurance industry whistleblower and New York Times bestselling author Wendell Potter. Wendell's the former vice president of corporate communications for the health insurance giant Cigna. Today, he's a strong and informed voice for Medicare for All.
Big insurance companies have been merging with big pharmacy benefit management companies in recent years. Aetna merged with CVS, which owns the big PBM Caremark. It is now the fourth largest company in America. The number 5 largest company is now United Healthcare, which has grown over the years because of mergers and acquisitions. It also operates one of the country's largest PBMs. Cigna, where I worked, is number 13 on the Fortune 500 of American companies. It merged with Express Scripts, which was yet another big PBM. And those companies together control about 80% of the PBM market and an enormous percentage of the health insurance market. Since the Affordable Care Act was passed, they've grown so much that their revenues have quadrupled and their profits have grown from something like $12 billion in 2010 to over $60 billion last year. So these companies have become massive.
The full Code WACK story on progressivevoices.com and on the PV app. Catch all our episodes by subscribing to Code WACK wherever you find your podcasts. This podcast is powered by Heal California, a nonprofit that uplifts the voices of those fighting for healthcare reform around the country. Until next time, stay healthy.
We are back on Leslie Marshall, back with CEO of Capital Markets Partnership, CMP. Their website, capitalmarketspartnership.com. Mike Italiano is our guest. Mike, before we get into solutions, is there anything that you want to say that I didn't get to ask before we get to some of these solutions proposed by your company, Capital Markets Partnership, to achieve that 2030 deadline to preserve a livable planet that IPCC recommended?
Leslie, no, I think getting into solutions, maybe talking a little bit about the San Francisco Bay Area can help people get a feel for what we're talking about, how this would work. So, for example, California and the Bay Area have more green buildings than any place in the world. The high-tech industry there has more companies going public, more venture capital firms. So there's 2 programs that we're working on right now that could, through initial public offerings that are green, in other words, companies want to go public, and if they do it in a green way, which is standardized now with underwriting standards, they can greatly increase the value of their company 3, 4, 5 times because of the investor demand. So with green initial public offerings, because so many companies would like to do this in the Bay Area. Probably would add about $600 billion to the economy of the Bay Area over 5 years. And that's ready to be launched right now. We're working on scheduling that event to launch that market. Secondly, with green buildings, private sector green building owners have to finance those buildings and refinance. When they do that, if they issue a bond, let's say you have a $400 million green building in downtown San Jose, if they issued a bond that's higher rated, which we've secured those higher credit ratings, for about $2 billion in zero emission buildings in San Jose, we've documented it would add 158 million in added value to that company. So if you had a portfolio owner that has 50 billion rather in green buildings, that would add about $5 billion to the company's bottom line. It would allow cheaper capital for those building owners. So right now, if you went to a bank and you want to get a bank loan for construction, you're getting 5% interest. If you use the higher credit ratings, you get 4%. That would have an immediate dramatic effect on the market. If all of a sudden everywhere globally, building owners could say, hey, I'm going to use these higher credit ratings, I'm going to get 4% as opposed to 5%, and the conventional buildings are going to get 5% and higher. That market impact is immediate. We don't need government. So these are some of the solutions, and we need to act fast because things like sea level rise flooding is accelerating greatly. We've done work with NASA Jet Propulsion Laboratories and documented that the Thwaites Glacier, the largest contributor to sea level rise flooding in Antarctica, is about ready to increase sea level rise flooding about 10 times. Now that could be, based on our calculations, maybe $500 billion in protections that are required by the Bay Area by 2030. These private sector bonds can help pay for that, though. So those are some solutions. We need to act fast, though, because we've calculated that if we don't do this in the Bay Area, maybe by 2035, that 500 billion costs maybe 5 trillion. So we really need to move fast right now so that climate resilience doesn't soon become cost prohibitive.
You had mentioned the Thwaites Antarctic glacier collapse impending. There's satellite imagery, and I want to point out that collapse graphic was actually prepared after 4 years of peer review by NASA, JPL. So that, this isn't like, some fringe group with a blog. I mean, these are extremely intelligent, well-educated, and very experienced and seasoned scientists who give out facts that many decisions throughout our nation, whether, on a governmental level or certainly an environmental level, are made each and every day. Talk to me about some of the solutions or what can be done further regarding unchecked carbon pollution, melting frozen organic matter like the tundra, and carbon pollution from wildfires.
Well, those are what the scientists call positive feedback loops. It's really a natural accelerator. And those are really tough. Wildfires are growing because the temperatures are higher. The intensity of the fires is higher. It's burning right through the soil profile. Also, with the warming temperatures, the tundra, frozen organic matter is melting. The only thing we can really do to stop that is to dramatically reduce carbon pollution. So it hopefully can slow the emissions, because those emissions, the methane, which is very powerful carbon pollutant from frozen organic matter, both at the tundra but also below the ocean, those are increasing. So we're not going to be able to do anything engineering-wise to stop that. The only thing we can do is dramatically reduce carbon. The fastest way of doing that right now is through the capital markets. We don't need government approvals. These higher rated bonds and green IPOs are ready to launch. Investors are screaming for it. They understand how serious this is. Investors have even calculated that about 6% of their investments right now are lost to climate change. So we need to really focus, as the IPCC says, on reducing carbon pollution. The solutions are there, the money's there. I think this is important. A lot of people don't realize that money's there. The government, federal and state governments will follow.
And when we look at the government and how much they're willing to pay, I mean, you have a cost of about $5 trillion when we go back to Thwaites and, a collapse. And, they say there'll be, 2 feet of rise by 2030. National security is brought up with regard to this potential impending Thwaites collapse. Can you speak to that so people understand, how this does, play into national security?
Right. Yeah. Now, let me clarify an important point. We don't know exactly when the 2 feet of rise is going to happen. However, we do believe, because the Thwaites Glacier grounding line, that's the intersection of the ice bedrock and ocean, is moving very fast within 10 miles of a steep slope where it could collapse and increase sea level rise flooding 10 times. Getting money for protections now, and a lot of places are doing this. San Francisco is spending billions of dollars. New York City, Charleston, Miami-Dade County, City of Miami all require development on higher ground. The military we've worked intensively with the military. About 6 years ago, they actually got appropriations funding for sea level rise flooding, paying for both global bases all over the world as well as adjacent communities. But we need to do this now for, let's take San Francisco Bay, San Jose, communities on the Bay Area. They need to start putting in protections. A lot of them are doing it now. The money is a key challenge, but with the higher rated bonds, they can pay for, from the private sector, regional government protections that benefit those building owners.
You mentioned Miami. We didn't talk about Miami Beach, and I met my husband in Miami. I lived in Miami. I love Miami, but I've been following this. And you mentioned higher ground. Can you speak to us? Because apparently there's porous bedrock there. In addition, when you just look at the amount of real estate, right? Millionaires and billionaires who have oceanfront real estate, if you have a collapse of that real estate market, you could trigger something like we saw back in 2008 with the financial crisis, and it could become global.
Right. And for that reason, we're proposing in the National Consensus Resilience Standard protections for 2 feet of rise by 2030. We're going out with a national public meeting shortly. We think that's really important because Miami Beach has a critical, unique problem where the bedrock is porous, and so the sea level comes up from below the ground as well as on the tidal surface. There's no permanent engineering solution for that. So we don't want the permanent mortgage holders in Miami Beach to be left holding the bag. There's time now to deal with that. We don't want financial contagion to start, which is how the 2008 credit crisis started. So this is bigger than Miami Beach. It's a global issue. If you remember the subprime fraud,
absolutely,
global financial crisis. So getting to higher ground, encouraging development there, like Miami, City of Miami and Miami-Dade County are doing, is the right way to go.
Mike, thank you for being with us. Interested listeners can support these nonprofit activities by donations and as volunteers, helping launch the higher rated bonds and green IPOs with a federal agency, large California city, and environmental groups. And you can do that by writing to MTS@sustainableproducts.com. It's MTS@sustainableproducts.com. We'll post that on our website. Speaking of the website, check out where Mike is CEO, capitalmarketspartnership.com. That's capitalmarketspartnership.com. Mike Italiano, our guest, is CEO of CMP. Thank you for joining us. Have a wonderful weekend. Marky Markham is our executive producer. And Mike, thank you for all of the education you provided.
My pleasure, Leslie. Thank you so much.